make this? Like, it's cool, don't get me wrong, you know, I like having an exclusive version of the Sonic, and I actually bought 2 to keep one in the box. It's shiny, and I like looking at shiny things, but what's the reason for this? Like, what made them go, yeah, we're gonna release a gold version of 14 Sonic that never appeared on screen? Weird. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. I was just looking at this new gold sonic screwdriver they released for reasons. While I got you here, though, I might as well talk about today's video topic, which is Russell T Davies opening up about the mysteries that we can expect to be resolved and not be resolved in the upcoming Season 2 in the future of his run. This comes from predominantly SFX magazine, where he's opened up to them about his approach towards Season 1 particularly. And I wanted to discuss some of the things that were said, because I have a somewhat conflicting kind of opinion on multiple different instances of this, and I kind of wanted to open up a bit of discussion around it, because I know for some people they're going to feel one way or the other about it, and I just want to lay out how I'm feeling about the way that RTD is dealing with hype and fan expectation, and kind of give my 2 cents on that whole shebang. But before we get into that, do me a teeny little favour and click that subscribe button. It'd be very much appreciated. We are trying to get to 25,000 subscribers as quickly as possible, and any support would be greatly appreciated on that front. So if you haven't seen, a headline has caused a bit of a stir in the Doctor Who community. Doctor Who boss says Mrs. Flood's breaking fourth wall might never be explained. This is from the Radio Times, but it's quoting an SFX article, which I suggest you all go and read. I read the whole thing myself. One of the most surprising elements of Doctor Who Season 14 was its repeated shattering of the fourth wall, but showrunner Russell T Davies has suggested we might never get an in-universe explanation for why it's happening. Elliot Dobson's enigmatic Mrs. Flood bookended the season by addressing the audience in the church on Ruby Road and providing some concluding remarks in the action-packed finale, The Empire of Death. Both of these moments tease bigger stories to come with that particular character. While the Doctor's own wings camera in the Devil's Court was seemingly just for fun, ushering in an elaborate dance number, in an interview with SFX, Davies was quizzed on this yet unexplained twist on the traditional Doctor Who style, but stayed non-committal on whether fans could expect the matter to be formally acknowledged. That hasn't been explained, and it might never be explained, frankly, he began. It's very interesting. Within the Doctor Who offices, we know exactly why that happens, and yet I'm showing no sign of putting that on screen. He continued, there is actually a reason for it that was in a very early draft of the Star Beast, but I see no reason to explain it whatsoever. My sister watches that. She doesn't blink. She actually doesn't blink when a character turns to a camera and gives a wink. I mean, you would if it was Pride and Prejudice. That would be odd. But there's something showy about Doctor Who. There's something proscenium march about it. There's something proscenium arch about it. There's something arch about it, full stop. For those unfamiliar with theatre jargon, a proscenium arch essentially refers to an area of the stage in which a show unfolds. It is the frame where the characters, locations, and scenarios exist. Good job I took A-level drama, because I knew what that meant, with the audience sat firmly outside. Of course, in some theatre productions, characters do occasionally step out to acknowledge the audience watching them, and Davies believes this isn't a stretch for Doctor Who to do the same. He added, I think it's a programme where you can very happily turn towards the audience. It's a very fine, very simple tradition. Even if there isn't a full explanation, fans may gain a stronger understanding of how Mrs. Flood can break the fourth wall when we learn the true nature of her character. At present, we know very little, but sinister dialogue uttered in the two-part finale suggested that she was a powerful entity with malicious intent. Roll on Season 15. I like how, by the way, Radio Times have been so non-committal in how that they've referred to this series. They've not gone for Series 14 or 15 or Season 1 or 2. They've gone for Season 15, which is a weird middle point between both terminologies. For me, I know I've started using like Season 1 and 2 in titles, but that's just because if there's anyone new watching Doctor Who or watching on Disney Plus who might be a bit confused by me saying, oh yes, Series 14, it's like, what do you mean? This is the first one of this run. So that's why I've been referring to that in thumbnails, mainly for YouTube algorithm reasons, to be honest. In my heart, this is still Series 14, I have to say. But I digress. That SFX magazine interview also goes on to suggest that the Mavity line is not going to be expanded on, and that's just a little fun thing that was introduced in Wild Beyonder that they're going to stick to, but doesn't necessarily have a specific sort of conclusion or endpoint in mind. Now, I'm a bit conflicted on this myself, because on the one hand, it's very much true that Doctor Who has a long history of breaking the fourth wall. Famously, Peter Capaldi did it, Tom Baker did it a few times, and the very first instance of it was with William Hartnell in The Feast of Stephen. This is a very common thing, especially for the Doctor to do, but it's also true in other stories where characters who aren't the Doctor have also done it. Just recently, in this season, we have the Maestro do it. I'm not against fourth wall breaks in Doctor Who necessarily. I think it is a fun narrative device in a show like this. That's fine. My issue, though, with this quote particularly, is that it's starting to become a bit of a pattern for me that things in this era will just sort of happen, and there won't be any elaboration on it whatsoever. Things like it's snowing when Ruby's family get mentioned, or Sutek's interest in Ruby's birth parents, or indeed the winks to camera by Mrs. Flood and other such characters. A lot of these vary in their severity, I will grant you. In cases like fourth wall breaks, I think it's largely fine, but when you begin to stack them on top of each other, it starts to feel a little bit unrewarding, a little bit frustrating for me personally, because I am someone who likes to dissect these things and kind of theorize about these things, and by them basically saying, oh, that doesn't matter, I think as an audience, you start to wonder, well, if this doesn't matter, and this doesn't matter, and this doesn't matter, why does any of it matter? And I think that is a slippery slope to go down personally. If all the signs for something aren't ultimately relevant, I think for especially casual viewers who might be following along, they might feel like their time is being wasted somewhat. Don't get me wrong, in cases like fourth wall breaks, I think that's fine, I think that's fun. Equally, another quote that came from the SFX coverage was Russell saying that the appearance of Richard E. Grant in the Doctor projections in Rogue was simply a bit of fun and a little nod. I think stuff like that's fine. Frankly, I don't think that needs a ton of explanation. That's the sort of thing where fans can come in and go, is it the Shalka Doctor? Is it the Curse's Fatal Death Doctor? Whatever, right? But when it's stuff that's very explicitly to the audience and very explicitly part of the narrative, I mean, these Mrs. Flood scenes, they aren't just blink and you'll miss it moments. The scene in Empire of Death is a whole minute-long sequence of her talking to the audience. That's not like, say, the Feast of Stephen, where it's just a random one-off, or the slight glances Capaldi gives the camera. That's a very deliberate stylistic change, and on its surface, I think that's fine. I think it's fine to have a different style for Doctor Who. But I think people aren't wrong for wanting it to have some sort of in-universe explanation. And as I said, it comes down to that feeling of, am I being rewarded for paying attention, or does random stuff happen just for the sake of random stuff happening? The thing that frustrates me as well is that he says outright, he knows why it happens, he just doesn't want to put it in the script. And above all else, I'm just sort of sat here like, why would you admit that? Why would you say, oh yeah, I know the answer, I could very easily put it in, I'm just choosing not to? Because I've seen a lot of people say that this is a product of like lazy writing, and I don't think it is that. I think it is a stylistic choice to deliberately evoke things like theatre and evoke things like fantasy more often, and I think that's fine. But I think when you're using fantasy and these kind of framing devices as not only just fun little things, but as the entire justification for something happening, for me it just feels a little bit, I don't know, hollow? Is that the word? Especially considering that with Mrs. Flood specifically, the only thing we know about her really is that she breaks the fourth wall. And that's been a big part of the theorising surrounding her character that Russell has admitted he wants fans to do. He wants fans to be talking about, oh, you know, is she like a god like the Maestro who breaks the fourth wall? Is she maybe the meddling monk who is watching on from a TARDIS somewhere? He's very explicitly stated he wants these moments to generate content. That was a line that he said in Doctor Who Unleashed that also was very controversial, which, for the record, I don't think is a bad goal to have. I think wanting to generate content through your work is a perfectly reasonable thing to want, especially in this day and age when online discussion is a big part of a show being a success. I don't think wanting that is a bad thing, and I think saying it out loud is quite refreshing. But that online discussion, that online content, has to be building to something, or at least be built upon something substantial. Otherwise, you just leave people kind of feeling like they've wasted their time. And I do worry that he's sort of straddling this line of doing fun stuff, which, sure, you know, it's funny. Like, I like Mrs. Flood saying, and he died a terrible death. Night-night, like, it's fun. But is that all Doctor Who wants to be? Does it just want to be a bit of fun? If that's what it wants to be, fine. But then don't sort of hype it up to be something deeper than that. Do you know what I mean? Because things like Mrs. Flood and the mysteries surrounding the snow have been very much hyped up by Russell himself. So it's sort of like, you're hyping people up and then sort of mocking the people who are getting invested in these little storylines and these little moments. And I just find it a weird approach. Again, I'll come back to an example I've mentioned before with Saxon. You know, Saxon was a small thing that there was no attention really drawn to other than, like, you know, posters on the wall and stuff. But that led somewhere. So for those people watching, it felt like a reward. It felt like a payoff. When you have something like Mrs. Flood happen and Russell just goes, yeah, that happens now. I don't know, it just doesn't quite hit the same for me. And I agree that fourth wall breaks do happen in Doctor Who. That's not my issue. But my issue is, when you have so many events just happen for the sake of happening, it sort of makes me question, well, why does any event matter? If it just happens for the sake of happening, why bother? Do you know what I mean? I think that is a concern that I have, and I find it a weird approach that he's taken, given that he managed to do these setups and payoffs, arguably, in my opinion, better first time around, or at least in a way that felt more rewarding to me personally as a viewer. But let me know what you think. This is a kind of a sort of ongoing discussion, so feel free to leave me your comments down in the comment section below. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.